As a reminder, this event is hosted by the Neuroscience Student Ambassadors and Advising Team. As mentioned before, a Google Doc with information on today's guests has been linked in the chat. Feel free to use it to help guide you through today's event.
Okay, before we get started, I'm going to go over today's event's process. Each speaker is going to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves, and then we will join into Q&A panels. Every panel is going to be moderated by ambassador students, and the session will end at 6:45, I believe.
We will then open up breakout rooms where students will have the opportunity to chat with professionals in a smaller group.
And each breakout room is going to last about 10 minutes, and students are free to leave and join every breakout room they want.
If one room is really packed, you can consider selecting another room with less students so you have the opportunity to really talk with the panelists.
Please contact Wiki and Imani if you guys have any technical difficulties.
With that covered and out of the way, let's introduce today's guests. I would like to first introduce Dr. Jessica Barson, who is an associate professor and co-chair of PhD admissions committee at Drexel University College of Medicine.
Thanks. So I'm Jessica Barson. I'm an associate professor at Drexel University College of Medicine, where I've had a lab since 2015. My PhD is psychology and neuroscience, and I'm chair of the PhD admissions committee there.
Wonderful. Now I would like to introduce Dr. Tracy Higgins, who is an associate professor in the Department of Psychology here at the University of Maryland.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm Tracy, and my PhD is actually in child psychology. And then I went on to do 2 postdoctoral fellowships. So my subdiscipline is developmental cognitive neuroscience. I study infant and child memory and brain development. And I accept graduate students through psychology, as well as the neuroscience and cognitive science interdisciplinary graduate training program at Maryland.
Next is Dina Sharik, who is a first-year PhD student in the neuroscience and cognitive science program at the University of Maryland.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. So I'm a first-year student in the NACS program at Maryland. I went to UMD for my bachelor's as well, and I majored in biology actually before the neuroscience program was born. I study poverty and how that impacts children's brain and cognitive development, as well as sources of resilience for those children, such as things in their neighborhoods or their community more broadly.
And next I would like to introduce Delisa Mercedes, who's a third-year PhD candidate in organizational psychology at Chicago School of Professional Psychology.
Hi, everyone. Sorry for the throat. Delisa Mercedes, thank you so much for having me. Just like Castro said, third year. Who knows when I'll graduate? That's where I'm at right now. And my emphasis is studying marginalized community and the perceived sense of belonging with the side of imposter phenomenon and behavior. I'm a geek. Thank you so much for having me.
We would also like to introduce Arcadia Ewell, who is a second-year PhD student at Boston University, where she studies developmental science.
Hi, everyone. I'm Arcadia. I went to University of Maryland for my undergraduate degree, and then I also did my 2-year postbac in Dr. Higgins' lab. And now I'm up in Boston. My research interests focus on experiences of early chronic stressors and how that relates to neurocognitive development, with specific interests in memory and executive function.
Last but not least, Dr. Daphne soares, who's an associate professor at New Jersey Institute of Technology.
Hi, very nice to meet everybody. It's a special opportunity for me to come back because I was the second graduate of NACS ever. the first graduate was actually my lab mate. So I love that the program is still going on so strong. It's excellent. I am in New Jersey, Rutgers and JIT, and I'm interested in how neurocircuits develop, but in the context of evolution. So a lot of the study that I do is intermingling evolution and development and neurophysiology, and we do a lot of anatomy, but mostly I'm really interested in how neurocircuits change over time.
We will now begin with our Q&A session. Thank you for the lovely introductions. We would love for 2 to 3 of our panelists to answer. What excites you most about the field of neuroscience today?
Well, can I jump in? Sorry. I'm actually pretty excited. Okay, I'm going to tell you the truth, because this is what happens with a lot of us, maybe not everybody. You know, you have these ups and downs of excitement, right? Is that true, everybody? Tracy's like, yeah, right? So sometimes, you know, you're just tired of what you're studying. But sometimes it's like, boom, this is so exciting. And I am one into these upwards just right now, just happened to be. And what really excites me right now is, in my neuroscience, at least, in my little corner of neuroscience, is how I am interacting with other biologists and even non-biologists. So I'm working with an evolutionary biologist, and the ideas are just like flowing back and forth, and it's just like putting things that I thought of for a very long time that I thought I knew, I actually don't know. And so putting neuroscience into the details of an evolutionary context has been excellent. So one of the things, I guess, if I can say, for me, has been what excites me about neuroscience is really about the people. It's about, you know, meeting all these wonderful collaborators, having great students, and just sharing excitement, you know, about life in general. So maybe it's not the science answer that you want, but it really is interacting with other people that have other points of view and they have different approaches. So for me, that's what it is.
I'll actually build off of what Dr. Soares, is that how you pronounce it?
Yeah, sorry, Daphne.
Sure. Dr. Soares. Is just how collaborative the field is becoming. That when I started graduate school 20 years ago, every single lab was an island, and you had to stand on your own 2 feet or not at all. And that's just not the direction of the field anymore. 2 of my 3 major grants are with our multi-PI collaborators. And what's great is that when these grants go out now, when these papers go out, I have these other pairs of very helpful eyes who are vested, who have different points of view, who are helping me. And so I'm no longer having to stand on my own 2 feet. My students are no longer limited by what just I have to offer, but there's a whole community now, and that's just much more widely accepted than it was 20 years ago.
I jokingly call that playing with friends. Of course, you want to collaborate, you know, you want to collaborate with people. So you're like, that person's cool. What do you do? Okay, let's talk.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe the other thing that I'll say about what excites me is we know just enough to know that we really don't know anything. You know, I mean, like there's great methods, you know, you're not like breaking ground, you know, maybe, but you know, there's a lot of techniques that have been developed. But I think, you know, now it's really an exciting time because you can start to use those techniques and cross fields and start, for me, it's like about mechanisms and how something works. So it's, I think, moving away from description perhaps of phenomena and really into the mechanisms for me. And for me, that's in the how things are happening in the brain and why behaviors are occurring. And so I think that's what's particularly exciting, not to be sort of birth of a field, and not one that's been around as long as maybe philosophy or something.
We talked a little bit about what excites you now, but let's go way back. What made you decide on pursuing PhD, specifically in the field of neuroscience?
Oh, I have a good answer for that. So I was an art major. So I was.
Same here.
Oh, really? Awesome. Yes. What did you do?
Animation.
Oh, okay. Yeah. No, I didn't want to do graphic. I wanted to do the classical. I went to Corcoran and I wanted to do the classical stuff. But anyway, painting and just that. And anyway, and then I took one of these general education courses, and then it was a professor there in the biology department who I think has retired, and his name was Richard Payne. And he told us, the students, that the nervous system has electricity. And I was like, no way, right? It's biology, it's all wet and sticky and it's the goo, it's not electricity. And that's what happened for me. I switched like that year into biology, and I wanted to discover, I stumbled into neuroscience because I started thinking, what is the most basic thing that I can possibly study with, what can I spend my life? What's the bottom of the most basic thing? And I actually thought it was math. So I was going to do math. Math is everywhere. Physics, chemistry, that's math. But then I thought, oh, without a brain, you don't have math, right? I mean, it exists out there, but it's not like our math. So that's how I ended up in neuroscience, because I think it's like one of the basic things that explains or in the selfish way, my existence. And then there are, different animals that experience life completely different than we do, right? So what's that all about? So yeah, that's how I got into neuroscience.
And I would like to just clarify, this question is not just directed to neuroscience field, any other field, so feel free to jump in.
If I may. 3 points as to how I came to know that I wanted a PhD. Number 1, I was going through the 40-year-old midlife crisis, or existential awakening, because I just think that sounds better. Like, who am I? What am I doing? What am I offering this world? What's the legacy for my children? Like, it was a hardcore existential crisis. Actually, in retrospect, I think you can say it was just a maladaptive coping mechanism. But I mean, just reading the science, being in school, just has always been my comfort, right? So it was my comfort amidst all the change and mayhem that I just couldn't handle. Number 2, my favorite question ever in the world has always been why? Why? Why, to the point that I got in trouble. And as I got older, I'm like, why are you acting this way? Like, that was always my question. I'm like, but why is your brain working like that? Like, I need answers. And then I wanted to be able to back it up intelligently, instead of people just assuming that I was just being mean. But I was really like, why? That. And number 3, in the spirit of transparency, my neurodivergent brain, I think I noticed that, even in undergrad and graduate school, my why questions and like my ideas weren't really received by my professors. It was almost like it was too out there. Like, why are you even thinking about that? Well, that can't happen. And I realized that in the PhD world, the academic world, like, my neurodivergent questions are accepted, and they're discussed and they're thought about. And it's like, wow, we didn't even think about that. So it's also, again, just additional comfort. And then just the idea of, entering academia and being published and doing research that, I can tell all the women, I did it, I got divorced, I got 3 kids. COVID happened, I was in my mid-40s. I have name it, every ADHD thing, I have it, and I did it. Like, just the idea that I get to do that, it's almost like, and I'm thinking about, oh, see, now I'm rambling. I was thinking about my like dedication, my acknowledgements, and I'm like, this has to be given to every woman who wanted, but just couldn't. You know what I mean? It's almost like, this is for you. I love you all. You know what I mean? So yeah, that's it.
Thank you. At this time, we will begin to take any questions from our audience. Please enter any questions you have in the chat. As we wait for questions to be asked, we would like a few of our panelists to tell us what do they think are the qualities of a successful PhD applicant.
I think admitting when you don't know the answers to questions is really important. I think coming in, we're taught to be very like, figure it out yourself, do it yourself. But once you actually start getting on research, it takes one little mistake and then the whole study is like a mess, and you don't want that. And so much of your first few years is just a lot of information being thrown at you. So being able to accept like, I don't know this and I need my hand held for this and I need coaching, or learning when to ask questions versus when to try things on your own.
If I may. I think what I would add to what makes a successful PhD candidate is to constantly remind yourself that you belong where you are. You know, as I'm studying belonging, you know, your intelligence, all your work, every internship that you did, that's what got you into the program. You belong there. I think what we don't talk about during orientation, that PhD school, it's the ultimate test of academic resiliency and academic tenacity. Like, you have to want it so bad that it makes absolutely zero amount of sense. You know, like you're going to feel insecure. Yes, you're going to feel like I don't know anything. Yes, you're going to feel the imposter syndrome, even though it's not a syndrome, it's a phenomenon, but whatever. But the point is,
Wait, let me write that down.
It's not a syndrome. It's not medically recognized in the DSM. I have So just, you belong. It's a tenacity. Yeah, you're going to feel insecure. This is brand new experience. You know, I think people forget that this is brand new. You know, it's like seeing a brand new color. How do you process it? How do I feel about it? So just, you're in because you're smart, but it's a new level of tenacity, man.
Speaking to the imposter syndrome, you know, you do the admissions committee a major disservice to think that you somehow pulled a fast one on us. We've looked at hundreds of applications for many years. We know what we're looking at. You didn't fool us. We saw you for who you are. And so if you're there because we chose you and because you deserve to be.
Yes. Yeah, I agree completely. It's like, you know, we've been around, we kind of know, right? If I may say so, something, I would like to touch two things. I don't remember what the first one was, but the second one was about the imposter syndrome. Oh, your kid wants you, the Lisa. The imposter syndrome, it's a pain. So try to get rid of it as soon as you possibly can. Imposter phenomenon, I'm so sorry. The imposter phenomenon, it happens to everybody. You know, it happens all the time. But as soon as you free yourself of this and you accept that you have the right to be there, just like Lisa was saying, it's like life is so much better, right? So, and you know, nobody else cares. It's fine. It's just in your head. The other thing I was going to say, what makes a good graduate student is, you know, we often talk about the self-drive, that you're going to do things, you're going to make it happen, and it's yours, you're going to discover. Yes, but you have to be smart enough to realize that you're doing this under mentorship, right? You have to realize that you need a good mentor, right? And if you don't find a good mentor, life's going to be much harder, and it can be really hard, right? So I think that you should take, it's not all you, but it's your responsibility to see, if working in that lab and under that mentorship is working for you. And it's your responsibility to say, no, this sucks. I can't do this right now with this person. Doesn't mean that the project is too hard. Doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that you're not good enough. None of that. It means that, that particular lab and, personality of your mentor, personality of your co-students, whatever, it's just not going to make it work, right? So, you have to have the maturity, I guess, to see, okay, this is not going to work out. I will change mentors or change labs or whatever. Because I've seen it happen again and again and again, that everybody gets really like, it's my PhD, and they're miserable for like years. And then they graduate and they're like, don't want to do science anymore, right? That's not why we mentor, right? We want you to be good, productive scientists, not fry people. Does that make sense? I know it's about the relationship, but it's about your own responsibility. You're responsible for your life, so you have to have that clear-mindedness, I think. Oh, there are these questions.
Beautiful responses. We've got some questions in the chat from students. First one from Caitlin. Did you have to decide on your specific topic of study before applying? How many schools did you apply to? And how did you decide which schools to apply to?
I will say I had the general idea of what my research interests are, but they have become more refined since being in school. And I think most people would agree that's part of the process. So I started by saying that my interests are in early chronic experiences of stress, on neurocognitive development, specifically memory and executive function. When I applied and I was asked the question, it was just, I'm interested in early adversity and neurocognitive development. So the theme was there, but it's gotten more refined the more experience I've gotten. I applied to 8 schools because that was all I could afford to apply for, because it is a very expensive process applying to graduate school. And I decided where I was going to apply based on the mentor. So I first looked for researchers that were doing research that was related to my interests that I felt like I could work well with. And it didn't matter if they were clinical psychology programs. It didn't matter if they were developmental programs. For me, it was just who was going to offer me the best fit. And that's how I decided where I was applying.
I know I'm not on the panel, but I need to jump in on this one because this is my plug to get to know your professors and go to office hours. Because when I got into graduate school, I got into a couple and I was deciding in the end between 2 after visiting them. And I went to Dr. Carr's office, who you can still occasionally take a course with. And I said, this is where I got into. What should I do? And she helped talk me through it. I then later came back and did a postdoc with her. But there are people around if the things that you're interested in and you build connections with your advisors or with your instructors, once you do get over that step of getting in, there are people around to talk it through with.
Can I address the part of how did you decide which schools to apply to a little bit? And it is a big decision, but I remember back in the day when I did this, considering like a safe school or a school in a place that I was like, well, maybe I could live there. Don't do that. This is your life. This is your, career journey begins, and grad school is hard enough. I would say if you're like not interested in living there, like let that be one of the factors, right? It doesn't all, even if it's the best program there is, or you think you need a safe school. So I would just say, really ask yourself, if I get in there, am I going to go there? And if you're like, no, don't.
I have a few points I'd like to add here. So speaking to the cost, I encourage you always to ask to see if those costs can be waived. They often can be, just people don't know to ask. So this is me telling you here, ask. Doesn't hurt to ask. I think there's sort of two kind of umbrellas for how these programs can work. There are programs that take you directly into a lab, in which case you want to make sure 100% you have a good fit with research interest and mentoring style with that person. There are other programs like ours, Drexel, where we take you into the program and then you rotate through labs before settling on a lab. And so for us, it's honestly kind of a red flag if you have a very specific project in mind already, because that means you've pigeonholed yourself into a single lab, and that lab isn't always going to be available to you. So we want to make sure that when we take students that there's at least 2 labs where they could potentially fit and have a home and be happy. So don't put the pressure on yourself to have a really fleshed out project. Often that's actually undesirable depending on the program that you're applying to. And the other thing I would say is mentor fit is such a big deal that even if the project isn't 100% what you had hoped to do, it is magical, the difference between a toxic mentor and a good one. And that's why I now study alcohol addiction rather than depression, because my first mentor who studied depression, which was what I so wanted to do, was just a terrible fit for me. And then I went to another lab where the mentorship style just gelled, and I fell in love with the field. So don't close doors for yourself. Keep an open mind, and really mentorship style and someone who's going to advocate you and shepherd you through the process is worth everything.
Thank you for your responses. We have another question from the chat. What advice would you give if you could speak to your undergrad / applying to grad school self?
I would just say there's a pandemic coming. No one knew this would be happening. Like, that's what I would tell everyone. But I think more importantly, like, controlling for the pandemic would be to allow yourself forgiveness, which I'm not good at, and also to understand that it is your journey and that it is no one else's journey, which is also difficult to understand, right? Like, one person may be 24 and loaded and hip, right? No problem. Like, the pandemic really didn't affect them per se, versus a single mom with 3 kids who was working full time. And now all of a sudden I have to homeschool and do this, So again, like, that forgiveness, that you do not know what's going to happen. Like, talk about risk management and planning. Like, if you really want plan A, then plan B through Z is going to be, well, let me figure out what plan A, how I will get that done in case everything happens. Perfectionism doesn't exist, which is also, I think, another difficult area for PhD students. You just can't compare yourself to anyone, man. It's just not a race. I don't think we'll ever get that. I mean, I won't, but it's not a race.
To my undergrad self, I would really encourage myself to start talking to my professors, because eventually that is what got me into having these research experiences. Like, literally, I don't think I would be here if I hadn't met like one single professor who was the person who told me, like, oh, did you know that PhDs are funded? Like, even that I didn't know until I was almost done with my bachelor's. So one, just talking to my professors, because I used to think that like I would be inconveniencing them or something by wanting to converse with them, but they usually are very excited to talk to students, especially if they're interested in the type of work that they're doing. And then during my application process, I did this a little bit, but I wish I did it more, was to reach out to those professors that I knew, and then even seek out other connections at maybe other schools to help me kind of make my list of like places I would be applying. Because if you know someone who knows someone, at the very least, they can tell you like, oh, I've heard they're not a good mentor, or this kind of like insider information that you cannot find by Googling. So that's actually how I found a lot of the people that I applied to through other people that I know recommending them to me.
Can I add one thing here? I don't think I knew what I was getting into. So if I could go back and tell myself, and this is a big distinction that I just try to tell people now. So if you already know this, sorry. But I think, if an undergraduate student, when you're doing it well, right, you're learning all the things there are to learn, and there's a textbook, and then you get really good at that, right? And you can study what's in the textbook, and then you learn the knowledge that exists, and then you take a test on it, and you're probably getting, fairly good grades, and that's enjoyable because, good grades are a pat on the back, and all that's very rewarding. And I think what I didn't understand then that I see now is in graduate school, that's maybe you take a couple classes your first year or two, but knowledge ends at some point. And then for research-based PhD programs, your job is to extend where the knowledge ends. And there's a great article, it's called The Importance of Stupidity in Science. It's one page. You can Google it, it will come up. And it basically says that you're going to feel stupid because if you're doing it right, you're going to get to the end of knowledge and then say, well, we don't know this, and you jump. And then you're like, oh my gosh, nobody knows the answer to this. But I mean, that's a different feeling than knowing it well and getting an A on a test. So that distinction, I think, either being ready for it or just not being daunted by the fact that you're swimming in a pool, where nobody else is yet, and being comfortable with that. It's different than undergrad. It's not just prolonged undergraduate years.
I think that Tracy is giving such good advice. And also because, if you do go to graduate school and you take a qualifying exam, that's exactly what they're going to do. They're going to push until you're like, I don't know. Right. So, people get really stressed out about qualifying exams, and it's their job to push to see how much you know. Right. So, yeah, for sure. It's a completely different intellectual experience. I personally didn't know what I was getting into either. But I was definitely lucky and I fell in love basically when I was doing. So I think with me, it was a little bit of luck. So, yeah.
If I can add one more thing quickly, just in terms of not knowing what you're getting into, in a moment of full transparency, I would have advised myself to get a good therapist before starting grad school. I started grad school last year, so I did my entire first year in the pandemic and with COVID and everything, and I think that contributed. But I think it's also just like naturally your first year is so different than anything you've ever done before. And I entered grad school feeling like I have this experience. I've been working for 2 years. I know who I am. I know what I'm capable of. And all of a sudden you're thrown into brand new roles that you've never done before. And I almost felt like I lost who I was a little bit. And it was a couple month process before I kind of found my footing again and was like, okay, I feel competent and I feel capable again, like I used to. So being proactive with taking care of your mental health, I think is really, really important.
Okay, this is a good question directed at our graduate students and Dr. Barson, who's on the admissions committee. What is the importance of undergrad research for applying to grad schools? Does it matter if I do an honors thesis?
I can speak to how Drexel does it. This does not necessarily apply elsewhere. For us, when we're looking at research, what we're really looking at is, does this person understand what the culture is going to be going into it and what the expectations are going to be in the lab? So that doesn't have to take the form of certainly a first author paper or even a co-paper. It doesn't even necessarily have to be an abstract, although that's great because it means that the lab considered that you contributed to the research in a substantive way. So what we really want to see is certainly not that you know a technique, because chances are we're going to retrain you in how we want you to do that technique, but just that you understand what's being expected of you going in, because you're making a best case scenario 4-year commitment, probably 6-year commitment. That's a huge chunk of your time, and this isn't a 9 to 5. So do you really understand what you're getting yourself into?
Yeah, so I mean, I can't speak to like how the admissions committee would look at it, but just personally, I think it's super important. I mean, if you can, I know like for me, I'll just say it was a limitation that I wasn't getting paid for my undergrad work. So if you can, I think it's really, really beneficial because you can see how it actually is and like the lab has people at all stages as well. So my undergrad mentor, one of the reasons why I was drawn to this career is because his life was like pretty cool. Like, he had like a good relationship with his daughters and like, they would come to the lab and like hang out. And previously I was like pre-med, so I was like, I don't know about that life. So that was like really good to see. That was something that was important to me. And I think in general also, being like getting that first-hand experience allows you to see whether that kind of career fits with your values, like just as a human being as well, which, from personal experience, it's really easy to get caught up like with prestige maybe, or like income, which obviously matters to everyone. But, you should make sure that your values are aligning with the type of work you're going to be doing too. And I feel like you can't read about that, like you have to experience it.
Yeah, I have 2 points on this. When I was an undergrad, one of the graduate students in my lab at the time, Kelsey, actually Tracy, she said to me, if there is any shadow of a doubt that you do not like research, don't do a PhD, because it's 5 years of like intense stuff that like isn't always very enjoyable. So if you don't need research and you don't need a PhD to get your dream career, maybe it's not the choice for you. And one of the best ways to figure that out is just getting research experience, regardless of whether or not you're getting a publication or an honors thesis or any of that. All that being said, I did independent research as an undergraduate. It wasn't classified as an honors thesis, but it was independent. And then I took my 2-year as a post-bac lab manager, and I rave about that experience to everyone I've ever met. It was such a good decision. I have not met a single person that takes time off in between to do research that regrets that decision. I think it helped me transition a little quicker into graduate school. And I was able to start working on posters and start working on a first-year paper and start working on my dissertation early because I had some of that experience coming in. So I think it's made the learning curve a little easier for me just to have that experience going in.
Thank you, guys. We have time for one more question before we split into our breakout rooms. So what experiences, aside from research, helped build your educational career / prepared you for graduate school?
I worked in a domestic violence shelter. Sorry, Delisa. I knew I wanted to work with kids, and I knew I wanted to work with like high stress populations. So I worked in a domestic violence shelter where I could get experience with my population of interest.
If I may say so. So I wanted to echo what you said about getting a good therapist. I think one of the things that, they stay with you for your whole life. Let me just tell you, if you got a good one, don't let it go. But I think another experience that allowed me to go through graduate school was really learning how to stop, how it's more like interacting with other people. I think the academic part is, it's not the easiest part by any means. It's not easy, right? But figuring out where you are and when to say yes and when to say no, that's really important. So whatever experience that you do, in my case, I was a firefighter, right? So I learned, when to make a decision and when to step back and let somebody else do the decision. And, and I think it has nothing to do with graduate school, right? But the meat of it, so, fire department has nothing to do, but the meat of what you learn about saying yes or no, doing it and not doing it, and knowing that you can, live with it. I think that's That was the most important thing for me.
Yeah, for me, it was ballet. I was a very serious ballerina, and I learned, drive and focus and resilience. And I did, perform on broken bones and things like that. And it's the greatest analogy for me with science, because there's so much judgment and there's so many times that you're pushing yourself and, people are telling you you can't do it, but you can do it and you're going to push through, and dealing with the rejection and pushing through. And so for me, this can take so many forms. But for me, it was ballet.
I'll just add that what was incredibly helpful was, yes, Arcadia, and yes, Dr. Daphne, you need a therapist. Like, how are you going to study psychology without going to therapy? I know not. But I also think, which was really hard, like genuine and honest reflexivity. Like, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I want to do this? Am I doing this because mom and dad told me I should? Or, that's what society says I should do. And I will be a failure if I don't. I really think before you start the entire process, yes, of course, you need a therapist, not a coach. No, a therapist. And really take pause and look at yourself. Otherwise, year one, you're done, because comps, forget it. Like, you want it badly. So.
All right, thank you for all the questions in the chat and all the answers from the panelists. At this point, we will open the breakout rooms and you can choose a room to visit. If you're not able to enter a room now, stay in the